Hello. I'm the aforementioned Lawrence Weschler, and I was asked to read a little bit from A Miracle Universe. Basically, this was a book about countries trying to deal with the tortures in their midst, and the part I'm going to read to you is about Uruguay, which had had a horrible siege. It had at one point the highest per capita rate of political imprisonment in the world. They had a particularly crafty thing going on there, not so much murder and a certain amount of physical torture, but the main thing they did, which was a lot of fun, was that they handed these people over to behaviorist psychiatrists with the explicit intention of driving them insane, and managed to succeed in a larger percentage of the population than any other country in the world in terms of political prisoners. Anyway, they had a democratic transition, and the first thing that happened was that the military that was leaving put a gun to the forehead of the civilian regime and said, give us an amnesty, which the civilian regime immediately did. They also appointed the former junta head to be the first head of the new civilian defense department. And so I went to go interview this man, General Medina, who'd been the last leader of the junta. And I'll just read from that section. I did get a chance to interview General Medina. Arriving for my appointment at the compact, elegant, one-time hotel that had been recast as the new defense ministry following the return of civilian rule, I experienced a momentary shudder. As the soldiers stepped up smartly, reviewed my papers, and waved my taxi, and I realized that this felt exactly like something, the sensation of leaving the realm of superfluous epiphenomena and entering the zone of true power. It felt, that was it, exactly like entering the Soviet embassy compound in Warsaw back in 1980. Sure, everything on the outside was real and authentic in its way, but it was obviously here inside that the parameters of the allowable were being set. A military officer ushered me into the building's central lobby, inlaid mosaic floors, murals of pastoral scenes, stained glass windows, a dark wood balustrade girdling the mezzanine, a curious fresco of a half-naked Venus wielding a club. And I noticed that virtually everyone moving about this Ministry of Civilian Government was in uniform. There were no women to be seen. Presently, Medina emerged from his office and beckoned me in. He had shed his uniform. I go on. I should mention, by the way, that there had been an incredibly courageous referendum campaign to overturn this amnesty, which had been preceded by the military saying, go ahead, sign that list. That's the list we're going to use if we torture next time, notwithstanding which a quarter of the population of the country had signed the list. So I'm interviewing him, and I'll just continue forward. I asked whether he, like President Sanguinetti, had been surprised at the intensity of feeling about the subject after the transition. You are putting me in a difficult position because I must say that on this point I do not agree with our president. Having observed the behavior of people carrying on this campaign to disgrace the armed forces and knowing the kind of people involved, having had direct contact with them in battle and in prison, made it easy to predict. Maybe not all this intensity, but there was obviously going to be trouble. Many of the prisoners had not been part of any armed apparatus, I pointed out, students, labor leaders, and so forth. How would he characterize those people? During the struggle against subversion, elements were captured from all sectors, the Tupamaros, the Communist Party. People were captured as a result of being denounced, as a result of the detention or testimony of other jailed people. A strange smile began to spread over his face. A man, after being arrested, was interrogated according to his characteristics, energetically or mildly. Energetically, I asked? Energetically in the case of a man who refused to speak. Energetically meaning what? He was silent for a moment, his smile steady. For him, this was clearly a game of cat and mouse. His smile horrified me, but presently I realized that I'd begun smiling back. It seemed clear that the interview had reached a crisis. Either I was going to smile back, showing that I was the sort of man who understood these things, or the interview was going to be abruptly over. So I smiled, and now I was doubly horrified by the fact that I was smiling. I'm sure he realized this because now he smiled all the more, precisely at the way he'd gotten me to smile, and how obviously horrified I was to be doing so. He swallowed me whole. Listen, he said at length, turning suddenly serious. In many instances, the life of our comrades was in danger, and he goes on to give that kind of explanation. And I'll just go forward to the end, just one last little section. What did he see as the role of the armed forces in Uruguay, I now asked him. Oh, he starts out by saying, since March of 1985, we reduced the armed forces by 5,000 positions, from 31,000 to 26,000, compared with about 15,000 in 1968. The other day I said to myself, if we continue to reduce the size of the military, I'm going to end up just being a guard. Ha ha ha. What did he see as the role of the armed forces in Uruguay? Neither Brazil nor Argentina was likely to invade. This was a country at peace, it seemed. Suddenly Medina, who had stayed completely unflustered through all the difficult terrain we'd covered up to that point, almost began to shake. Will you give me a guarantee that they won't invade? He raised his voice. We have the mission to defend the sovereignty, the borders, and to maintain order within the country when we are required. We may be a small country, but we have dignity. And if we were a country without an army, we would be very close to being a country without dignity. He was speaking with suddenly desperate intensity. And indeed, I felt that we had come to the very nub of the matter. It had something to do with this matter of the wandering we in his answer, the we Uruguay shimmering, vibrating, blurring into and out of the we, the armed forces, the dignity of the country being wrapped up in the dignity of its armed forces, whose very raison d'etre seemed to be their own dignity. And I push things a bit further, and eventually, just to end it, I get to a point where I talk about how what's beginning to happen is that people who are covered by amnesty in their own countries are being subpoenaed by other countries where the amnesty to them doesn't apply. And he just says, this is completely unfair. This is unjust. And then he's talking about a particular case, and he says, look, I won't enter into that kind of speculation. I'm not going to tell you whether the officers will be turned in or not for extradition. What I'm saying is that it's not rational, it's not logical, it's not just. When or if I see the extradition papers, then we'll see. And with that, our conversation came to an emphatic close. As he was escorting me to the door, he laughed self-deprecatingly and said, when this appears, they're going to hang me. He nodded in the direction of the officers milling around the lobby, but he didn't seem too worried.